Corruption is a continuous problem of the abusement of power by the ones in authority. It is very much so rampant here in the Philippines. The economy is greatly affected because it will depend on how the country is governed, and obviously, when there is no integrity, the economy will go downhill. Society is highly affected by this too because it is tax money that is being tax money is supposed to be used by the government to pay for public services like social security, technology, country debts, healthcare, public education, salaries, and more. Basically, money should be used to serve all the citizens, but these funds are used for whatever personal need the corrupt officials have. People might say that it is not the only cause of the country's failure because we still have poverty, the lack of education, unemployment, malnutrition, but no. The problem mentioned wouldn't exist if the government decides to utilize the money for the solutions instead of hogging it all for themselves. To begin, let us talk about poverty. Here in the Philippines, a lot of you might say that poverty is the main reason for failure in the country. But corruption results from poverty. It skews decisions and diverts scarce funds, denying poor people access to basic social services and resources to improve their livelihoods. Without corruption, the budget of the country will be put to better use, therefore reducing the homelessness of the people and the poverty rate. In addition, we have unemployment. And to put simply, corruption affects economic growth, which then leads to unemployment because of an economic crisis that would stem from the corruption. The money should be used for economic purposes such as salaries for the Filipinos or healthcare. It's baffling to see tons of businesses in the Philippines which should have helped in the rise of the economy with the taxes that the businesses pay. How does unemployment relate to corruption? Unemployment depends highly on the country's economic state. How are we ever going to solve unemployment problem in the Philippines when it is completely dependent on the economy? That problem, unsurprisingly, leads us back to corruption. Corruption is the reason for the economic crisis that affects unemployment in the country. Unemployment affects the people, which steers them to being broke and then falling into poverty. Because of being jobless, the Filipinos don't have money to sustain themselves and especially their children.
Malnutrition is a result of not having enough money to sustain the children. The Philippines ranks 5th among countries in the East Asia and the Pacific region, with the highest stunting prevalence and one of 10 countries with the highest numbers of studied children in the world. Unemployment and poverty has affected the Filipino children's lives. What is the cause of malnutrition? Unemployment and poverty. What causes unemployment and poverty? Corruption. Because of malnutrition, the children suffer lethal diseases. But fortunately, the Philippines has made a major milestone that entitles each and every one of the Filipino people to proper healthcare. At least on that aspect, we are improving. Going back to poverty, the Filipinos that are under the line don't have money for children to go to school. They don't even have money for food, how much for school? This brings us to the past issue about child labor. Because they don't have proper education, they are forced to work at a very young age for money. You see, these children are forced into an issue in the streets begging for money, another effect of corruption. Furthermore, there is a lack of education here in the Philippines. There are a few investments that come to the Philippines and the government is supposed to save that to invest in national companies like hospitals and education. That budget could have been used for greater things, great things like public education. If all the children had access to education, it removes the wrong practices like child labor. Public education could lead everyone to a career that would help boost the country's economic growth. The question is, how are we going to do that? We can't, because corruption is still around. The corruption money can be and should be for education, but think about it again. If corruption wasn't a problem, would there still be a problem of education? In conclusion, will poverty, education, unemployment, and malnutrition still be a problem if the root of it is gone? The political class is wasting money that is meant to be spent on economic development and projects for population, but they are using it instead for their own purposes. It has made our economy very fragile. If you really think about it, with corruption gone, the rest of the issues will start to be resolved. With all of the money being put to a better use, in better hands, and better causes, all these problems will be long gone. Corruption is a cause of problems, not a consequence of problems. If they combat the crisis, which would be useful for creating new jobs and helping the poor, thus fixing the problem of unemployment and poverty, corruption will be followed by a never-ending problem in the country. It has made our economy very fragile. If you really think about it, with corruption gone, the rest of the issues will start to be resolved. With all of the money being put to a better use, in better hands, and better causes, all these problems will be long gone. Corruption is a cause of problems, not a consequence of problems.